The desert wind had a way of speaking to a man if he stayed quiet long enough. Some folks said it carried the voices of the old land. Cowboys long gone, buffalo hunters, Apache warriors, or even the spirits of the mountains themselves. But to Jake Donovan, it sounded mostly like emptiness. A steady, restless whisper moving across the endless stretch of sagebrush. It fit him perfectly. At 32, Jake had lived more miles than most men twice his age. He'd ridden cattle trails from Wyoming to New Mexico, slept under skies so wide they made a man feel small, and survived heartbreaks that cut deeper than any spur wound. But none had broken him quite like the one that sent him back here. Back to this worn-down cabin on the edge of the Arizona plains, where silence settled thicker than desert dust. Once he'd imagined a life full of noise, laughter by the hearth, a woman's warm voice calling him home, children racing through the yard. Reality had delivered something far harsher, a marriage that crumbled, trust that shattered, and a loneliness so heavy it pressed into his ribs like a branding iron. So he came here, to the only place that had ever felt honest. The days followed a predictable rhythm, the kind of rhythm a wounded man could hide inside. With the dawn, he'd be out fixing broken fence posts, hammering until his thoughts quieted. Midday found him saddling horses for neighbors who trusted his steady hands and calm way with animals. By dusk, he'd be riding out across the ridge, checking on stray cattle or lending a hand to ranchers too old to do the work themselves. It wasn't glorious work, but it kept his mind from drifting to places he didn't want it to wander. Jake didn't need much, just his horse, the open range, and the certainty that no one expected anything from him anymore. And for a time, that was enough. But the land had a way of shifting when a man least expected it. Sometimes it came in the form of a summer storm rolling in from the south. Sometimes in the cry of a hawk gliding low over red rock canyons. And sometimes in the figure of a stranger moving into the old cabin just beyond his property line. It happened one late afternoon, the sun melting into the horizon in shades of copper and dusty gold. Jake was out by the corral repairing a loose plank when he spotted movement. Subtle at first, just a flicker of dark cloth against the pale backdrop of the desert, then clearer. A wagon, small and battered, pulled by a tired-looking mule, and beside it walked a woman, alone. She paused at the gate of the empty cabin, studying it with a stillness that struck him instantly. The wind tugged at the ends of her long black braid, and the beads woven into it glimmered like tiny sparks when the sun hit. She carried herself with a quiet strength, shoulders steady, chin raised, eyes sharp enough to slice through the distance between them. An Apache woman. It wasn't often one settled this close to town, let alone by herself. Folks around here tended to keep to their own, and prejudice lingered in the dust like an old rattler that never truly died. But Jake didn't feel suspicion when he looked at her. What he felt was something shifting, a faint ripple beneath the surface of a life he'd kept painfully still. He told himself not to stare, but his gaze kept drifting back to her as she unpacked her wagon, carefully, deliberately, as if each item held a story. A bundle of herbs, a carved wooden bowl, a worn blanket with colors faded but still beautiful. She moved with purpose, but also with a kind of sorrow, an ache he recognized too easily. Because it lived in him too, the sky darkened behind her, painting her silhouette in deep amber. Something about the scene lodged itself inside Jake, stirring emotions he thought he'd buried under layers of dust and memory. The land had been calling him lonely for years, but now for the first time in a long while, it seemed to hum with something different, something curious, something unexpected. And as he leaned against the fence rail, watching the mysterious woman settle into the abandoned cabin, Jake Donovan felt the desert wind shift, as if whispering that his quiet life was about to change forever. Morning in the desert had a way of revealing things a man might have missed the night before. The sun rose slow and fierce over the red mesas, burning off the last traces of night and painting the land in warm streaks of amber. Jake Donovan saddled his horse at first light, same as always, though today his mind kept drifting toward the old cabin beyond his fence line. The Apache woman was still there. He didn't know her name yet, only the way she moved, steady, graceful, as if every step connected her to the earth beneath her feet. She wasn't like the ranch wives in town or the girls who worked at the saloon. There was something unbroken in her, even though her eyes suggested she'd carried more than her share of heartbreak. And that morning, as Jake rode past the edge of his land, he finally saw her up close. She was struggling to drag a heavy sack of dried corn from the wagon bed, her boots digging into the sandy ground for leverage. The mule tied beside her flicked an ear in mild concern, but didn't offer much help. For a moment she tried again, jaw clenched, breath short, and Jake realized she was too proud to call out even if she needed to. His horse had barely stopped before he swung down. "Ma'am," he said gently, "that sack looks like it's fixing to break your back. Mind if I lend a hand?" She froze. Not with fear. Jake knew the look of fear. No, this was measured caution, the kind of wariness a woman develops from years of being watched by the wrong people. Her dark eyes studied him like she could read every truth he'd ever hidden. Then finally she nodded. "Thank you," she murmured. Her voice was soft but sturdy, like a river that had carved its way through stone. Jake hefted the sack with ease and carried it toward the porch. She followed, keeping a respectful distance, hands clasped lightly in front of her, as if unsure whether to explain herself or stay silent. When he set the corn down, he turned back to her. "Name's Jake Donovan," he offered, brushing dust from his palms. "Tala," she replied. Just that, no surname, no explanation. Yet the single word felt full enough to echo. Up close, she was striking in a way that had nothing to do with vanity. Her braid hung over her shoulder, threaded with turquoise beads and a single falcon feather. Her clothes were simple, a woven skirt, a faded shawl draped around her shoulders, and the kind of hand-stitched moccasins that carried stories of long roads traveled. She stood tall, back straight, though there was a heaviness to her posture, as if she bore memories too complicated for words. Jake sensed that heaviness, and something in him responded to it instinctively. "Settling in all right?" he asked. She blinked once, a slow, thoughtful gesture. "I'm trying." Trying. The word landed deeper than she likely intended. Before he could ask more, a wagon rolled past on the road. The rancher driving it shot Tala a sideways look, one of those tight-lipped stares that said too much. Tala's eyes lowered, shoulders hardening for a moment. She'd felt this before. It wasn't new to her. Jake's jaw tensed. Folks around here didn't always take kindly to an Apache living so close. Some feared what they didn't know. Others simply didn't care to. But Jake wasn't most men. He'd spent enough nights on the trail beside Navajo scouts, and enough mornings learning from Comanche horsebreakers to know better. Most prejudice came from ignorance, not truth. Still, seeing her shrink beneath that stranger's stare lit a spark of anger inside him. "You don't mind folks much, do you?" he asked carefully. "I've learned not to," Tala answered, eyes back on the horizon. "People see what they want to see." Jake didn't know what to say to that, but she didn't seem to expect him to. Their conversation drifted into quiet. Not awkward, just peaceful. The wind picked up a strand of her hair, brushing it across her cheek. Jake had the ridiculous urge to tuck it behind her ear, but he stayed where he was, respectful, steady. She wasn't someone a man pushed. Over the next days, their paths crossed more often. A wave across the fence line. A brief talk about the weather or the coyotes howling at dusk. A shared silence while watching dust storms roll across the flats. Small moments, but they stuck with him like burrs on a saddle blanket. Jake didn't realize how much those moments mattered until one evening. While fixing the water trough, he caught himself glancing toward her cabin, hoping to see her step outside. Hoping. It had been a long time since hope felt like anything other than a fool's gamble. But Tala wasn't like anyone he'd met before. She spoke little, but every word carried weight. History, sorrow, courage. She moved quietly, but her presence shifted the air around her. And against all reason, the lonely land around Jake Donovan began to feel less empty, as though the desert itself had inhaled, waiting for whatever came next. Storms were rare in that part of Arizona. When they did come, they came like a warning, sudden, fierce, and heavy enough to rattle the bones of the desert. That evening, the sky bruised over slowly, clouds stacking high like restless mountains. By sundown, thunder was rolling across the plains, low and unforgiving. Jake Donovan had just finished securing the barn doors when the first sheets of rain slammed against the earth. Lightning split the horizon, illuminating his modest cabin in brief flashes of pale fire. He stepped inside, shook the water off his hat, and was reaching for a lantern when he heard it. 3 sharp knocks, fast, urgent. He froze. Nobody visited during a storm. Hell, nobody visited him at all unless they needed a fence fixed or a horse trained. Jake grabbed the lantern and moved toward the door, boots heavy on the wooden floor. When he swung it open, the storm seemed to fall away for half a heartbeat, because standing on his porch, soaked to the bone, breath shallow, shawl plastered against her skin, was Tala. Rain slid down her cheeks like tears she refused to shed. Her braid was undone at the ends, beads trembling with each shiver. She looked small against the raging wind, yet there was nothing weak in her posture. Something kept her rooted there. Something heavier than the storm beating against her shoulders. "Jake," she said softly, voice trembling but steady enough to stand on. I'm sorry for coming so late." "What happened?" he asked, already stepping aside. "Come in before the wind sweeps you clear to Mexico." She hesitated just for a breath, then crossed the threshold. The warmth inside hit her immediately. She wrapped her arms around herself as Jake shut the door and latched it tight against the storm. "My fire went out," she whispered. "The wood was damp. The wind kept pushing smoke back into the room. I couldn't get it started again." Jake frowned. Cold's nothing to play with on a night like this. He knelt at the hearth, stacking kindling with practiced ease. Within minutes, flames crackled to life, casting a golden glow across the room. Tala knelt beside him, stretching her hands toward the heat. The fire's light reflected in her dark eyes, revealing exhaustion and something deeper. Something she'd been carrying alone for far too long. "You're shivering," Jake murmured. "Sit. I'll make you something warm." He brewed tea from a tin he rarely used. Spice and pine needles, the kind his mother swore could steady any rattled spirit. When he handed her the steaming cup, Tala cupped it gently, as if afraid it might slip through her fingers. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was quiet, almost swallowed by the fire's soft crackle. For a while, neither spoke. Rain hammered the windows like 1,000 tapping fingers. Lightning pulsed across the sky, washing the cabin in fleeting white. Tala watched the flames, her expression distant, too distant for a woman merely seeking warmth. Jake leaned against the table, arms folded loosely. "Tala, was it really just the fire?" Her shoulders stiffened. The question hovered between them. Then slowly she shook her head. "The storm," she began, then paused, searching for the right words. "It reminded me of winters back home, when the wind pushed through the lodges and the elders told stories to keep us brave. But those stories, those voices, aren't with me anymore." Jake's chest tightened. "You left your people," he said gently. "Some things," she answered, eyes glistening in the firelight. "You don't leave. They follow you, even when you wish they wouldn't." The lantern's glow framed her face in soft amber, revealing emotions she fought to hide. Loss, guilt, maybe even fear. Jake recognized the look. He'd seen it in his own reflection after the day his marriage ended, and the world he knew collapsed like a burned-out barn. He moved to sit across from her, not too close, but close enough for her to know she wasn't alone. "You don't have to tell me everything," he said, "but you don't have to hold it all by yourself either." Tala looked at him then, really looked, as though measuring the weight of his offer. "My people had expectations," she said finally, "plans they made for me, a path I was meant to follow. But that path," her voice cracked, barely audible, "it wasn't mine, and leaving it behind left scars no one can see." Jake nodded slowly. "I know about scars like that." Her eyes softened, something unspoken passing between them. Recognition, maybe even relief. The storm outside raged on, but inside Jake's cabin, a strange quiet settled. Tender, hesitant, alive. 2 lonely souls sitting by a fire, sharing the first truce of many. And though neither said it aloud, both felt it. This night, this storm, had pulled their lives onto the same trail. One neither of them expected, but both were already walking. The storm softened sometime after midnight. The thunder rolled farther into the hills, and the rain thinned into a mist that tapped gently against the windows. Inside the cabin, the fire settled into a steady glow, casting long shadows that swayed across the wooden walls. Tala sat wrapped in one of Jake's wool blankets, her knees drawn close, the steam from her tea curling up like a faint spirit between them. For a long while, neither spoke. They didn't need to. The quiet was warm, anchored by shared breath, crackling fire, and the fragile safety that comes when two weary souls recognize something familiar in one another. Finally, Tala let out a slow, trembling breath. "There was a man," she murmured, staring into the fire as if the flames might swallow the memory. "A marriage chosen for me, a path laid before I ever learned how to speak for myself." Jake didn't move. He knew enough to let her take her time. "In my tribe," she continued, "marriages bind families, keep the circle strong. My family believed they were doing what was right. They did not see—" Her voice faltered, tightening with old pain. "They did not see how small I felt inside a life that wasn't mine." The firelight flickered across her face, revealing the deep, aching truth carved beneath her calm exterior. "He was a good man to others," she said quietly. "Respected, steady. But with me, he was heavy as a storm cloud that never passed. Every day I woke with less of myself until I felt I might disappear entirely." Jake's jaw tightened, his hands curling into fists on his knees. Not out of anger at her people, but at the loneliness she must have endured. Silent, hidden, suffocating. "So you left," he whispered. Tala nodded. "I walked away from everything. From my lodge, my family, the river that raised me. I crossed miles of land with nothing but a blanket and the courage I barely believed in." She swallowed hard. "They say a woman alone is unnatural, but staying felt worse." Jake understood that more than she could know. The silence stretched, but it wasn't empty. It was charged, alive with truths they had never dared speak aloud. "My turn," he said softly, surprising even himself. Tala lifted her gaze, waiting. Jake stared into the fire a moment, letting the flames tug forth memories he'd locked away so tightly he thought they'd turn to stone. "I had a marriage too," he began, voice low and rough. "A beautiful one, at least I thought so. She was everything I believed I didn't deserve. Kind, gentle, someone who smiled at me like I was worth something." His throat worked as he forced the next words out. "Turns out I wasn't all she wanted or all she needed." Tala didn't interrupt. Her stillness invited honesty. "She found comfort somewhere else," Jake said, "with someone I trusted." He let out a humorless laugh. "Funny, isn't it? You spend your youth learning how to fight bandits and calm wild horses, yet the thing that breaks you is a truth whispered in the wrong moment." Tala's eyes softened. Her blanket slipped slightly as she leaned closer, drawn in by the weight in his voice. "I kept riding after she left," he said. "Thought the wide west was big enough to outrun memory. But grief follows like a shadow. Doesn't matter how fast your horse is." He lifted his eyes to hers. "Sometimes the land feels too wide, other times too small to hold the hurt." Tala exhaled sharply, a sound between agreement and sorrow. Two lives, two paths carved by different storms. Yet here they were, side by side, sharing burdens carved deep beneath their skin. The fire crackled again as if urging them closer. "You and I," Tala whispered, "we are both the ones who walked away before we vanished." Jake felt the truth of it lodge inside him like a seed finding soil. "Seems that way," he said. The warmth between them shifted, gentle, steady, no longer fragile. A quiet understanding filled the room, soft as a blanket laid over shivering shoulders. Jake didn't reach for her, and she didn't reach for him, but something passed between them all the same. Recognition, acceptance, the first breath of hope after years of silence. Outside, the storm finally broke apart, leaving only the soft hum of night. Inside, the fire glowed brighter. Two souls, damaged, worn, but still standing, leaned a little closer to the warmth they'd found. And for the first time in many years, both wondered if healing might not be such a distant thing after all. The fire had settled into a deep, steady burn, glowing like a small sun in the corner of Jake's cabin. The storm outside faded to a distant murmur, like a memory slowly drifting away. Jake thought the night's confessions were behind them, that Tala had shared all she intended to share. He was preparing to offer her the bed, planning to take the chair himself, when he noticed the way she kept glancing at him. Not timid, not unsure, but bracing herself, like someone standing at the edge of a ravine, choosing whether to step forward or step back. "Tala," he asked softly, "you're looking at me like there's something else you're holding back." She didn't answer at first. Her fingers tightened around the blanket. Her breathing slowed. Then after a long hesitation, she lifted her eyes to his. Eyes dark, vivid, unwavering. "My fire," she whispered. "Jake, my fire was not broken." The words struck the room with more force than the storm. Jake froze, the air thickened. Even the fire crackled quieter, as if leaning closer. She set the blanket aside and stood, hands trembling just slightly. Enough for Jake to see, enough for him to feel the weight of what she was about to say. For weeks now, she continued, I have been finding reasons to walk near your land, to bring water to the mule at just the right moment, to work outside when I knew you passed by. Her smile was faint, trembling. And tonight, I needed a reason to knock. Jake's lips parted, but no sound came out. He felt the truth settle into him like warm lightning. Unexpected, powerful, impossible to ignore. Tala took a single step closer. I didn't come because of the cold, she said softly. I came because I didn't want to face the night alone. Not tonight. Her voice didn't hold seduction. It held honesty, a raw, earnest honesty that a lesser person would have hidden. She reached for the clasp of her rain-soaked cloak and let it fall gently from her shoulders. Underneath, she wore simple Apache garments, woven cloth, a leather sash, beadwork worn by years. It wasn't revealing. It wasn't meant to be. It was her, unshielded, unarmored, standing before him without pretending to be anything other than a woman learning how to breathe again. Jake felt something shift inside him. Not desire, not hunger. Respect. Deep, anchoring respect for the courage it took to stand there like that. Offering truth instead of comfort, vulnerability instead of charm. He rose slowly from his chair, every movement measured, afraid even a sudden breath might break the moment. Tala, he stepped closer, stopping just within arm's reach. Why tell me this now? She swallowed, eyes shining in the fire's reflection. Because hiding myself, it kept me alive once, but now it only keeps me lonely. She exhaled shakily. When I left my people, I promised myself I would not give my heart again. But when I speak with you, when I hear your truth, something opens, something I thought was gone forever. Her hands suddenly went tense, as if expecting rejection, as if expecting him to pull away. She started to step back, but Jake gently reached out and caught the edge of her fallen cloak. Hold on, he murmured, his voice steady as the desert horizon. You don't need to stand there exposed to prove anything. He lifted the cloak and draped it back over her shoulders with a tenderness that surprised even him. She closed her eyes at the gesture, breath trembling, not from fear but from relief. This ain't about whether I want you, Jake said softly. It's about making sure you're not putting yourself in another place where you give more than you get. Her eyes opened slowly, meeting his. And what do you want, Jake Donovan? He breathed in deeply, feeling the fire's warmth at his back and the storm's fading chill pressed against the window. If what you're telling me is true, if this is something real for you, he touched the cloak's edge to steady his voice, then we ought to start it the right way. Calm, honest, one step at a time. Tala held his gaze for a long, quiet moment. Then she nodded, small but sure. Outside, the last raindrops slipped from the roof, falling into silence. Inside, two hearts, battered, cautious, but undeniably drawn together, found the beginning of a new trail, a trail neither had expected to find, and both were finally brave enough to follow. Dawn broke clear and sharp the next morning, as if the storm had scrubbed the whole desert clean. The mesas glowed red under the rising sun, and the air held that rare coolness that never lasted past mid-morning. Jake Donovan saddled Buckshot early, brushing the stallion until the coat shone like polished obsidian. His hands moved with practiced ease, but his heartbeat didn't share the same calm. He was nervous. A cowboy who faced rattlers, outlaws, and blizzards without blinking, now nervous. Because he was going to ask Tala on a proper outing, a real beginning, just like he'd promised. When he rode toward her cabin, she was already outside, shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders. She looked both expectant and unsure, like a woman caught between wanting to stay safe and wanting to step into something new. Morning, Jake greeted, breath fogging softly in the cool air. Tala hesitated only a moment before nodding. Where are we going? Town, he answered. There's a place with decent stew and terrible coffee. Seems like a fine start. A faint smile touched her lips. Jake extended his hand. She took it. With surprising grace, Tala swung up behind him, settling lightly in the saddle. Her fingers gripped the back of his leather coat, tentative at first, then firmer as Buckshot began to move. The warmth of her hands seeped through him, So did the trust in that touch. They rode across the open flats, the wind cool against their faces, the desert stretching wide in pale gold around them. Tala's breath pressed softly against Jake's back. The rise and fall of it felt like a steady rhythm he hadn't realized he'd been missing. Every now and then, he spoke, small things meant to ease her nerves. "You holding on all right?" "Yes," she murmured, voice brushing the back of his neck. "I trust you." The simplicity of that statement hit Jake with unexpected force. He kept his eyes on the horizon, swallowing a knot in his throat. When they reached town, it was busier than usual. Ranch hands loading wagons, wives bargaining at the general store, dust swirling at boot level. As Jake dismounted, people glanced their way. Some stared openly. An Apache woman walking through Main Street wasn't something they saw every day. Tala stiffened. Before the discomfort could settle, Jake stepped closer, placing a gentle but firm hand at the small of her back. It wasn't boldness. It was clarity, an unspoken declaration. "She's with me." She looked up at him, and whatever tension she carried eased a little. Inside the saloon cafe, more stew house than drinking den, conversation dipped as they entered. Jake ignored it, guiding Tala to a corner table. The old barkeep ambled over. "What'll it be, Donovan?" "2 bowls of stew and a coffee. Make the stew good and the coffee survivable." Tala's quiet laugh, soft, warm, fleeting, felt like sunlight breaking across a cold ridge. Jake found himself grinning wider than he intended. When the bowls arrived, they began eating in silence, letting the world around them fade. Only when the room settled back into its usual noise did Tala speak first. "What dream did you leave behind, Jake?" He blinked. "Dream?" She nodded. "Last night you said you lost something before your marriage fell apart. Something that wasn't her." Jake set down his spoon, leaning back slightly. "I used to write," he admitted. "Stories about the people I met on the trail. Cowboys, drifters, kids trying to outrun the world. I thought maybe one day those stories might amount to something. But after she left," he exhaled, shaking his head. "Didn't feel like the world needed my voice much." Tala studied him, not pitying, not judging, simply seeing him. "You still have that voice," she said. "I heard it last night." Something warm settled in Jake's chest, steady and grounding. He asked, "Well, what about you? What dream did you bury?" Tala looked down at her hands, tracing the beadwork at her wrist. "I wanted to teach the children of my tribe. Stories, songs, healing ways passed down by the elders. But when I chose my own path, I lost the right to guide theirs." Her voice trembled, not from fear, but from memory. Jake reached out, not touching her, but close enough for her to feel the intention. "Doesn't mean you can't teach again. Maybe not there, but somewhere." Their eyes met, and in that small, crowded cafe full of strangers, a silent understanding passed between them. Gentle, genuine, impossible to ignore. They were two people carrying unspoken loneliness, battered dreams, and quiet hopes they barely dared name. But in each other's presence, those buried pieces stirred, loosening like hard-packed earth after a good rain. When they mounted buckshot to head home, Tala no longer gripped Jake for balance. She held him with trust, with steadiness, with something that looked very much like beginning. And Jake, for the first time in years, felt the land around him widen. Not with emptiness, but with possibility. A desert courtship had begun. Slow, sincere, and alive with fragile hope. The weeks that followed moved with a gentleness neither Jake nor Tala had expected. Out in the wide desert, where life was usually carved from grit, dust, and stubborn survival, something softer began to bloom between them. Something unhurried, something steady, something rare. Jake started by teaching Tala the rhythm of long-distance riding. She wasn't new to horses. Apache women rode as naturally as breathing, but Jake's style was different, shaped by endless cattle drives and nights spent under cold, open skies. He taught her how to lean into buckshot's gait, how to read the flick of his ears, how to feel when the stallion was ready to run or when he needed rest. Tala listened with the same quiet intensity she gave to everything, and Jake found himself talking, not just instructing, talking. Some days she'd surprise him with a bold laugh when Buckshot tossed his head playfully. Other days she was contemplative, taking in every detail of the horizon as if the desert itself whispered secrets to her. In return, Tala began teaching Jake pieces of her world, pieces he'd never asked for but cherished more than he knew how to say. She showed him how to pronounce Apache words with respect, how to greet the morning sun with gratitude, how to listen to the wind not for direction, but for memory. She taught him a handful of old songs, haunting, trembling melodies carried by generations. Songs about longing, about loss, about mountains watching over wandering hearts. Jake wasn't a man who cried easily, but the first time he heard her sing at twilight, he felt his throat tighten in a way he hadn't since he was a boy. Those evenings became their ritual. After the sun dipped behind the mesas, staining the sky in bruised purples and fiery reds, they would sit near the fence line or by the quiet embers of a small campfire. They spoke of things they didn't dare share with anyone else. Fears with edges sharp and hidden, dreams with roots they thought had died, loneliness with shapes they finally recognized in each other. It was during one of these dusky conversations that Tala noticed a leather-bound journal peeking from Jake's coat. "You write again," she said softly. Jake stiffened. Trying to. She reached for the journal but paused before touching it, letting him decide. He handed it to her. She lifted it gently, reverently. "This was the dream you lost?" He nodded. "Stories. I used to believe they mattered. After what happened, I didn't see the point." His voice lowered. "But lately, I feel words pressing against me again, like they've been waiting." Tala smiled, not bright, not bold, but with a warmth that felt like sunrise after a long winter. "Then let them in." Jake didn't know it then, but she was the first person in years who'd believed he had anything worth saying. And she, in turn, found something returning to her. A voice she thought had been silenced when she walked away from her tribe. Tala began practicing the old songs again, her voice shaky at first, then steadier, richer. Songs she hadn't dared sing since leaving home. Sometimes she sang for Jake. Sometimes she sang for the night sky. Sometimes she sang just to remind herself that she still belonged to something ancient and beautiful. Jake would watch her during those moments, mesmerized by the way the firelight softened her strong features, how the wind braided through her loosened hair, how her voice drifted into the desert like a prayer, finally finding its way home. Two souls once dry, hardened, and cracked by the weight of their scars began to soften, day by day, word by word, song by song. And though nothing between them had been labeled, claimed, or spoken aloud, both could feel it growing, steady as desert grass rooting after rain. A bond, a trust, a tender, cautious hope. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't rushed. It simply formed, like water finding its path through stone. Jake found himself looking for Tala when he woke with the dawn. Tala found comfort in Jake's steady presence as evening settled like a blanket over the land. In a world shaped by harsh winds and harder choices, these moments, quiet, fragile, precious, were something close to a miracle. And neither of them wanted to let it slip away. Peace in the desert is a fragile thing. It blooms slowly, tender as the first green shoot after a long drought, and just as easily, it can disappear. Jake didn't notice the change all at once. It came quietly at first, like a cool wind slipping under a door. A day when Tala didn't meet him at the fence line. A morning when she kept her eyes lowered instead of lifting them with that soft, steady warmth he'd grown used to. Then another day when she said she was too tired to ride. Then another when she stayed inside entirely. Within a week, the easy closeness they'd built, those rare days of quiet peace, felt like sand sliding through Jake's fingers. Tala moved differently now, smaller, quieter, as if gathering herself inward, a leaf curled tight against a cold wind. He saw her once through her cabin window. She sat at the edge of her bed, hands tangled in her hair, shoulders trembling in a way she tried to hide. Another night, he noticed her walking outside long past midnight, pacing in circles as if fleeing a shadow that never left her side. Her eyes, once so alive with curiosity and the soft glow of hope, now carried a deep and familiar sadness, one Jake recognized from his own darkest nights. Fatigue hollowed her cheeks. She startled easily. She slept little, if at all. Jake tried to give her space, believing her silence was temporary, but each passing day carved a deeper ache into him. She canceled plans with short, clipped answers. She stopped singing at dusk. She declined the simple invitations that once made her smile. And Jake felt it, that terrible rising fear he thought he'd buried years ago. The fear of being abandoned again. He told himself he was being foolish, that her struggle wasn't about him, but the old pain, the betrayal that once cracked him open, began clawing its way back through old ribs. What if she was pulling away? What if he'd imagined the bond between them? What if he wasn't enough? For her, for anyone. The thoughts gnawed at him like wolves on a weakened carcass. One afternoon, he found himself unable to focus on the ranch work in front of him. He hammered a fence post wrong 3 times before tossing the tool aside with a sharp curse. Buckshot, tied nearby, flicked his ears in concern. Jake scrubbed a hand over his face and muttered, "What in hell am I doing wrong?" But deep down, it wasn't anger he felt. It was fear, raw, familiar, and unwelcome. By the time the sun fell, leaving only the lingering warmth of red rock behind, Jake knew he couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. The desert night grew cold quickly, winds sweeping across the flats with a sharpness that rattled the windows of his cabin. Tala's lantern hadn't flickered on. Her door hadn't opened. Her silhouette hadn't crossed the yard. Something was wrong. Something far deeper than simple distance. Jake grabbed his coat, pulled it hard around his shoulders, and stepped into the wind. Sand whipped against his boots, hissing across the ground like a warning. But he pushed forward, jaw set, determination burning through the doubt. He crossed the yard in long strides, then the empty stretch of land between their cabins, then the narrow path leading to her doorstep, half buried in drifting sand. He didn't hesitate, not this time. He pounded on the door, firm, steady, unwilling to walk away. "Tala?" His voice was rough, torn between fear and resolve. "It's me." No response. Wind moaned through the rafters. He tried again. "Please open the door." Still nothing. He pressed his forehead against the wood, closing his eyes. "You don't have to say a word. Just let me in. Just don't shut me out." Something shifted behind the door. A soft step, a breath, a hesitation thick with exhaustion. Then the latch clicked. Slowly the door creaked open. Tala stood there, wrapped in a thin blanket, dark circles under her eyes, her face drawn with the kind of fatigue that reached the bone. She looked like someone who had been fighting a battle no one else could see. Jake's chest tightened. "Tala," he whispered. Her lips trembled, not in anger, not in rejection, but in surrender. And in that moment, Jake knew. This wasn't a woman walking away. This was a woman drowning silently. And he had come just in time. For a long moment, neither Jake nor Tala spoke. Wind howled outside her small cabin, rattling the shutters like restless spirits. Inside, the single lantern flickered weakly, casting a soft glow across Tala's face. Pale, exhausted, trembling. She stood before him like a shadow of the woman he had come to know. Not weak, but worn, stretched thin by something far heavier than silence. Jake stepped inside, closing the door gently behind him. "Tala," he said, voice low, steady. "What's happening to you?" That was all it took. Her breath hitched, sharp, broken, before her hands flew to her face. A sob escaped her, muffled at first, then widening like a crack in the earth after rain. It was the kind of sound that hollowed a man from the inside out. Not because it was loud, but because it was full of pain she'd buried too deep for too long. Jake moved toward her instinctively, but he didn't touch her. He waited, giving her space to crumble without fear. When she finally lowered her hands, her cheeks were wet, her eyes red-rimmed. She looked at him as if expecting judgment, expecting him to turn away like others had. "I am not leaving you," she whispered hoarsely. "I never wanted to." She swallowed hard, struggling for breath. It's my mind. When the darkness comes back, it steals all the air around me, makes me feel small, trapped, like I'm losing myself again." Jake's heart clenched. "I thought," she continued, voice trembling, "that if I stepped back, if I stayed away, I would keep you from carrying my weight. I didn't want to become a burden." Her voice cracked at the last word. It wasn't the fear of the darkness itself that broke her. It was the fear of losing him to it. She wrapped her arms around herself, as if holding her ribs in place. "When my marriage fell apart, when I left my people, they told me no man would stay with someone like me. Someone who struggles, someone who fights shadows no one else can see." Jake's jaw tightened in quiet fury. Not at her, but at the ghost that had told her lies. "I saw you pulling away," she said, voice scarcely above a whisper. "And I thought, if you knew how deep this darkness goes, you might walk away too, like he did." The final words dissolved into a trembling whimper. Jake inhaled slowly, steadying himself, then stepped closer so she could feel the heat of him, the earth-solid presence she thought she might lose. "Tala," he said quietly, "look at me." She lifted her face, eyes shimmering with fear and longing. "You think your darkness scares me?" he murmured. "I've lived with my own." She blinked, startled. Jake took a breath, letting the truth rise from the deepest part of him. "After my wife betrayed me, something in me cracked. I'd ride out for days so I didn't have to think. Couldn't sleep more than a few hours. Some nights I'd feel a weight in my chest so damn heavy I thought it might crush me." His voice trembled at the edges, not with weakness, but with honesty. "I was afraid of being left again, afraid of being not enough, afraid of watching everything I built fall apart." He paused, letting the confession settle between them like dust after a long stampede. "You think we're different," he said, "but we ain't. Not where it matters." Her lips parted, breath shaky, as if those words alone loosened something knotted deep inside her. Then Jake did the one thing she wasn't prepared for. He opened his arms, not demanding, not assuming, just offering. An invitation, not a rescue. Tala hesitated, fear, shame, hope swirling all at once, before stepping forward, collapsing into his chest with a soft, broken sound. Jake wrapped his arms around her, holding her as though protecting something fragile, yet fiercely precious. She clutched his coat, sobbing into the warmth of him, while he lowered his cheek to her hair, whispering softly, "We both carry wounds, but if you let me, I'll walk through the dark with you." Her fingers tightened. Jake pulled her closer, grounding her with the slow rise and fall of his breathing, the solid strength of his embrace. "You're not a burden," he whispered. "You're a person, and you're worth staying for." Tala's sobs softened, turning into trembling breaths, like a storm weakening, finally breaking apart. Outside, the wind still roared. Inside, a different storm finally began to quiet. And in the shelter of Jake's arms, Tala realized something she had long stopped believing. She did not have to fight her battles alone anymore. Healing did not arrive like a thunderstorm or a revelation. It came quietly, drifting into their lives the same way desert dawn touched the mesas. Slow, patient, almost shy. After the night Tala collapsed into Jake's arms, something in both of them began to shift. Not instantly, not perfectly, but steadily, the way water carves stone given enough time. Tala no longer hid behind long silences or shuttered windows. Jake no longer flinched at the thought of losing someone he cared for. Instead, the two of them found a fragile rhythm, one built from small acts, shared breaths, and the bravery of simply staying. Some mornings, Tala woke with the weight of the world in her chest, the old shadows tugging at her. Jake would brew coffee and sit beside her in quiet companionship, letting her lean against him until her breath steadied. Other mornings, it was Jake who woke unsettled, memories clawing back from the past, reminders of betrayal and abandonment he once thought he had buried for good. Tala would place a gentle hand on his shoulder, humming an old Apache tune that eased his spiraling thoughts. They breathed through the hard days together. That was what made all the difference. There were no dramatic declarations, no sweeping promises etched under the desert moon. Just two people learning how to speak honestly, how to listen with patience, and how to keep choosing each other in the quiet spaces of everyday life. Jake rebuilt the fence between their cabins, not to divide the land, but to secure it, and left the gate between their properties wide open. Tala planted herbs behind her porch, teaching Jake which ones soothed the mind and which ones cured sleepless nights. Some evenings he read aloud pieces of the story he was writing again. Other evenings, she sang songs she once believed she would never dare sing outside her childhood lodge. They grew in each other's presence, slowly, tenderly, like desert wildflowers after a rare rainstorm. Sometimes when the nightmares came for one of them, the other was there with steady hands and steady breath. Jake learned how to anchor Tala when panic tightened her lungs. Tala learned how to pull Jake back from the echo of old betrayals. And together they discovered that healing wasn't a destination at all. It was a path, winding and imperfect, but one they could walk side by side. The townsfolk eventually grew used to seeing them together. The stares softened. The whispers faded. Slowly, a kind of quiet respect replaced the unease. Perhaps it was the way Jake always glanced toward Tala first, making sure she was comfortable. Perhaps it was the way Tala carried herself, with dignity, with strength, with the unmistakable presence of someone who had endured storms and still stood tall. But to the two of them, none of that mattered as much as the small, simple truth that had rooted in their lives. They chose each other, every day in dozens of quiet, unspoken ways. There was no wedding, no lace, no preacher, just a life gradually intertwined. Two coffee cups on the same table, two sets of footprints leading toward the ridge at sunset, two blankets drying beside the fire after an unexpected rainfall. A home not built from grand gestures, but from steady companionship. Laughter that came easier with time, and trust that deepened with every sunrise. One evening, as the sky burned gold and the first stars pricked through the fading light, Jake and Tala sat on the porch of the little wooden cabin that had once been hers alone. Now it felt like theirs, simple, solid, and warm. Jake rested his arm along the back of her chair. Tala leaned into him, her breath slow and contented. "Funny," Jake murmured, watching the horizon. "All this land, all this space, and the thing I needed most was right next door." Tala smiled, a soft, knowing smile. "The land is wide," she said quietly, "but hearts are small. They only need one person to feel full." Jake looked at her then, really looked, and felt gratitude settle into him like a sunrise. Not blinding, not loud, just warm. And as twilight deepened around them, a final question echoed. Not only for them, but for anyone who carried scars beneath their ribs. Who among us walks this world without wounds? The real choice is not whether we're broken, but whether we run from love or step toward it with someone willing to stay. The desert breathed, night settled, and on that old stretch of land, two imperfect souls kept choosing each other, one dawn after another.